Hi everybody, I'm Kevin and it's almost hiking season, so I'm here to help you decipher some of the myriad of options out there you see in hiking boots and trail shoes. I've got my own personal boot graveyard. We're going to walk through it, no pun intended really, and spot some of the things you maybe want to look for in hiking boots and maybe some of the things you want to avoid. So stick with me, I'll be back in a flash. All right, let's get started. We're talking about rugged footwear for traveling through nature, on trails, away from pavement and blacktop and concrete, places that are flat. We want to walk on rocks and trees and mountains. We want rugged footwear that is designed for that. So we got a choice between a trail shoe and a hiking boot. Well, why would you choose one over the other? Let's talk about that real quick because that's going to be the first choice you're probably going to make. Unless you're infatuated with what color is it. That might be the first choice. But you're probably going to choose between a boot and a shoe. So the obvious difference is the boot is, it's a boot. It's taller, right? If you're familiar with what we call work boots in civilization, on pavement, inside houses, people wear boots to protect from side impact. It protects your ankle, whereas this doesn't have that protection. Out in nature, that's also a concern, although it's probably not going to be a 2x4, it's going to be a rock. The other concern is probably more important is uneven terrain is going to twist your foot to either side. And depending upon where you're going, if you're walking on relatively flat trails, it might not be a concern. You could use this shoe instead. But if you're going to be facing situations where your foot gets thrown to the side like this gives you some protection against getting a sprained ankle. And it's particularly important. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it really works. Hiking boots come in different grades. You can get a lightweight boot, a midweight boot, and the heavy ones are generally called backpacking boots. They're designed for carrying heavy loads. A lightweight hiking boot is going to have a similar sole on it compared to a trail shoe. And then a midweight boot would have a stiffer, a more durable sole, and a backpacking boot would have the most heavy-duty, durable sole with extra shock absorption in the heel because you're carrying heavy loads over multiple days, perhaps a week. But with the trail shoe, you're probably going to have the equivalent of a lightweight sole. I can bend this pretty easily, but it will bend at the ball of the foot, not on the instep. Likewise with this boot, but it's a little bit difficult to move. Bends at the ball of the foot, doesn't bend on the instep. I'll show you a boot later on that doesn't flex at all. But the differences between these boots, the difference between the boot and the shoe is largely the different grades, light, mid, heavy. It has to do with shock absorption, it has to do with durability of the sole, and as well as the height and the ankle protection. The common features between these two is they both have extra toe protection. Now this is not the same thing as a work boot that has a steel box in the toe. This is a rubber protection, and it's not going to help you if you drop a safe on your toe, but it is rubber. It's going to protect you from water as well. You don't want water penetrating inside the toe, and that's where it's most common as you go splashing through puddles or maybe walking in the rain. So this is impact resistance and weather resistance. The other thing that you're going to find common between these two, a little bit more with the boot, is the heel cup. This is a very rigid heel cup. It keeps your heel very stable over the footbed. The lightweight trail shoe, not so much, but it's still there. It's more than a street shoe, but not as much as the boot. So a lot of features here that are common with athletic footwear, but making this a trail shoe, it is more rugged. It uses, they always use a bit of leather because leather is a fairly durable, or synthetic leather. It's fairly durable material, but you see even here, it did tear, caught it on a rock or something, so it's not bomb-proof. Something like this has a little bit more leather on it, and it's probably more durable. You see it has a stamp on the sole, says Vibram, very common. We'll talk about that more, but the sole or the outsole, in particular in a trail shoe or hiking boot, if you bend it, and if you're shopping for, a trail shoe or a hiking shoe, always do this to it in the store before you buy it. And it has a stiff piece of material in here. It's either metal or nylon or something like that, that prevents it from bending in the middle, which is the thing you won't find in a court shoe or street shoe. So as this one started to wear, I thought, well, maybe I'll just get another one just like it, because I really liked it. And but it's not cheap. I think this was like $80, and I found this one by the same company, and it actually looks quite similar. Same color, some of the same materials. It has that mesh for warm weather. It has a composite sole, different, it has a reinforced heel and a reinforced toe. It's very similar. So, well, let me try that because it's cheaper. Unfortunately, the sole of this shoe did not last well at all. It's actually a much thinner material, and what's here is that's like leather right now. It's not waterproof, it's not durable, and I can feel rocks right there when I step on it. So this shoe didn't last me nearly as long as this one did. Whereas this one, it does show some wear in the upper. This is the upper, and this is the outsole or the sole. This one started to have a problem on the upper. This one, the upper is in great shape, but the outsole just didn't last at all. And I would kind of hope that you'd be able to see that just by looking at the edge of the shoe. How much black part versus how much of this other part. But it's not really all that clear to me. I mean, if you put these two side by side, maybe you can see that there's a difference there, but I certainly didn't have the expectation that this shoe was going to wear through so quickly, but it did. In retrospect, this was a much better shoe. Before we move on, let me show you a completely different shoe. I'm reluctant to call it a trail shoe, but interesting, it does have this Vibram stamp on the bottom, just like this one does, and just like that one does too. It's a good grippy rubber. We'll talk more about that. But you see that the pattern of the lugs is very, very different. And in retrospect, I rarely wear this shoe. I found that it wears very quickly. But this pattern on it is very good for loose material. If you're hiking through pine needles or on a sandy beach, this is pretty reasonable. I wouldn't wear this on a trail. My experience was after just a couple of uses, the lug started to wear. I don't know if it's because it's a different kind of rubber from Vibram. Obviously, it's a different color. But it's just the pattern of this sole is not for general purpose. See what I mean? You certainly wouldn't, if you play basketball or baseball, you wouldn't be wearing this kind of a sole. I wouldn't wear this on a general trail either. But I got them on sale, and it was a good experiment. Okay, now, part 2. We'll get into the boots, not trail shoes. It does kind of look like the other shoe, like the trail shoe, except that it's taller. It has a much stronger heel cup compared to the other shoe. It does have a composite sole. You see there's at least 2 different materials here. And as I said before, some of these things are put together with not just stitching, but glue. And you can see there's a little bit, it's starting to come unglued right there. But if we look at the other shoe, that's pretty bad. And you may have had this problem with your court shoe and gone down the street and buy some shoe goo or some kind of repair adhesive, trying to put it back together again. And I tried that, and it didn't really do very well. In addition to this problem here, I need to point out this type of thing where it wraps, the sole wraps up onto the upper is typically called a rand, R-A-N-D, a rubber rand. And one of the problems that I come across quite often with these boots is the adhesive between the rubber and the leather doesn't last. You see there's a problem right there. And what happens is if you're in the rain or you step in a puddle, that actually acts as a catch basin. It runs off the top of the boot, gets in that crack, and your feet get wet. So even though this thing was put here to protect the seam of the upper and the outsole, it actually introduces more of a problem if the adhesive lets go. This is a pair of shoes that I'm wearing right now, and you see there it is again, same problem. I wouldn't call these a hiking boot, really. Let's do the sole test. See, that's bending at the insole. That's not really a good trail shoe or a hiking boot. These are just a cheap shoe that I got at Bob's store or someplace, I don't remember. They look like a hiking boot. They might even be advertised as a hiking boot, but they do have the reinforced toe. It does have a reinforcement on the heel. It has a padded collar. It's got a lot of the features of a hiking boot. It really does, but this kind of kills it right there. That's not good for hiking extremely rugged terrain. I am still wearing these shoes, and I don't know whether that's the bird poop I stepped in or what, but that's paint. That's something else. But the boots I'm going to look at now, get rid of that, is more what I consider a sort of one boot does everything. You could use it for day tripping. You could use it for a weekend trip, maybe even a week-long trip. Really, it has the strength and the durability, but still, it's not particularly heavy. You don't want to be carrying 5 pounds on each foot. So this is a boot that I wore for many years, but I stopped wearing it before its time. It's still got life in it, but I stopped wearing it. In particular because of the sole. I mentioned before, on some hiking boots you'll find a black sole with this yellow label that says Vibram. Vibram. This one's too old. Oh well, no, that one was Vibram too. This is so well worn you can't even read it anymore. But this one did not, and I took a chance on it because the boot itself is exceptionally well constructed. Look at the toe reinforcement on that. Compared to that, look at the heel reinforcement. This one doesn't, well, it's leather, it doesn't really need it, but it has a composite construction. It has some mesh for breathability in warm weather, lots of very strong leather. It has a different types of materials in the sole to give you absorption on impact, reinforced heel cup, good padding. One of the most important things you can look for in a hiking boot is this collar has to be extremely comfortable. Wear them around the store where you're buying them. Try them on. If it's the slightest bit annoying in 10 minutes, you don't want to be 5 miles out on a hiking trail and have this thing rubbing your ankle in a weird way. And it's just people's feet are different, and one boot might work exceptionally well for somebody, and on somebody else it's going to cause an abrasion. You're going to get a blister or a sore spot, and you can be very uncomfortable. So the collar is very important. Most of these boots have an exceptional collar. It's just one of those things you can only figure out by trying them on. But the construction of this boot is really good. I've been so impressed by this. There's a little bit of stitching that came undone there. But I stopped wearing them before their time because the sole will slip on a wet surface, particularly if you're walking on a rock. Wet rock can be slippery. This boot won't slip. Well, at some point it will. Much less likely to slip than this. This boot, much less likely to slip than this. Just in practical experience, this sole gave me trouble. I love everything about the boot except the sole. Stop wearing them. And I'll probably toss them because they've done their job. This boot, again, exceptionally well constructed, very impressive. This is by Salewa. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is by Asolo or Asolo. Both excellent companies. Look look at the reinforcement here. I don't even know what that is. And this one has a piece of wire that runs from the insole around this pin, around the heel to the other side, and back around this pin to the insole again. So the entire boot is reinforced with a piece of like stainless steel wire. It was intriguing. Very strong heel cup, exceptionally well protected toe. Some people like the bright color on the tongue. This big loop here helps you pull the boot on. This one has a small loop. This one has a much bigger loop. This doesn't have any loop. This doesn't have any loop. Both really good boots. I stopped wearing this one even before I stopped wearing this one, not because there was anything wrong with the construction, but the single most important thing about buying hiking boots. The single most important thing is how well does it fit. And although I tried these on in the store and I thought they fit, in the long run, I decided they were too narrow. They just weren't that comfortable for me. Very well constructed boot, very impressive, but just didn't fit my foot well. So again, this boot has lots of life left in it, but I stopped wearing it. Go back about 20 years, and this is what I was wearing then. This is a full grain upper. The upper part of the boot, as opposed to the outsole or the sole, this is the upper. It's completely made out of leather, and that has benefits, particularly in snow. You can waterproof these boots really well by putting special wax on them. There's different brands like Snow Seal that you can really make a full grain leather boot completely waterproof. The other way of doing that is to get a boot that has Gore-Tex in it. This boot does have Gore-Tex in it. Right there, it's got the tag on it. This one I don't. Yep, this one's got it too. There's Gore-Tex in that one. So that's a layer inside the upper that should keep water out. It should still let your foot breathe. It has to do with the, you can read up on it, it has to do with the size of the pores. It's a porous material, but it keeps out water drops, yet lets water vapor pass through it. This boot doesn't have any Gore-Tex. It predates Gore-Tex. This boot's been around longer than Gore-Tex. And but it can still be completely waterproof just by applying a wax to it. And it's certainly cheaper. These high-tech fabrics and things like Gore-Tex are going to increase the price of the boot. Some people feel that Gore-Tex boots are too warm in summer. The full-grain upper leather boots have been around for ages. The oldest boots were full-grain leather upper, and they were attached to the sole using stitching. And you get something like a very expensive custom-made limmer, and you can literally just detach the sole and put another one on it. But this boot did have the Vibram sole. It did give me trouble where the water got in between the rubber rand and the upper. You can see it's extremely well worn. I wore these a great deal. The sole is extremely worn. I've got tons of miles on these boots. It's still a good choice today. Just because it looks old-fashioned doesn't mean it doesn't work well anymore. This one, this is the boot I'm currently wearing for a crossover boot that can handle backpacking or very heavy-duty terrain. This is made by Loa. One of the best boots I've ever had, probably. Extremely well constructed. You see the toe guard is extremely lengthy. It potentially could come unglued at some point. It hasn't done that yet, but the heel guard has a very similar wraparound. Has something on here. It almost looks like Kevlar. I don't know what that is. Most of it is leather. It has very durable metal eyelets for the lace, excellent padded collar, padded tongue, Vibram sole. This is a deep lug pattern. Some of these boots don't have a deep lug pattern, and depending upon where you're going, some people recommend you don't wear deep lug because it tears up the turf. But if you're hiking in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, across the Presidential Range, definitely like to have a deep lug sole, and these boots they do not slip like this one. Very well constructed, but it's a little bit heavier. It's very rigid. It will bend in the sole of the boot, but this is a much stiffer boot than some of these others. So this is why I say it's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit stiffer. So if you're going on a weekend trip or even a week-long trip, this will do the job. But I would even wear this on a day trip. It's a one boot does everything. Nice boot. Before I close, let's talk about the fourth season, which of course is winter. Requires a different kind of boot for a lot of things, depending upon what you're doing. If you're taking a walk in the park or on a bike path or a trail near home, you might get away with wearing the same footwear you wear all year round. But if it's particularly cold or icy, or you might want something warmer. So here's a boot that this probably looks familiar to a lot of people. This is made by a company called Sorel, but there's a lot of alternatives out there. I don't want to call them knockoffs really, but LL Bean makes boots like this. Cabela sells boots like this. Some of them have, this has a deep lug pattern on the sole. The boots I'm used to, I've seen around town, people shoveling their driveway, it doesn't have this deep lug pattern. It's something that, I call it a duck boot. I don't know why exactly. I think LL Bean calls them duck boots, but the thing they have in common is it's basically rubber all the way around, and it reaches pretty far up the boot. Here you can see at the point where the leather is attached to the rubber, it's attached with a triple stitch. So it's most stitching, I'm looking at this boot and that's got double stitching. This is triple stitching. And the thing that really sets this boot apart is it does have a lot of insulation. This has a felt liner, can actually be removed and replaced. And this one's pretty well worn. It probably needs to be replaced. But so it's mostly rubber, has a lot of insulation, and the thing I need to point out about this boot here is it has a lot of flex in it. I can completely twist this sole. So it has no rigid shank in the middle, and you probably wouldn't wear this on a rocky terrain where a pointy rock is going to cause you discomfort in your foot. Actually, these boots are a little bit big on me. They have a sloppy fit, so they're not good for hiking in general, but I wear them all over the place. For shoveling snow in the driveway, for walking down a hiking trail that's not particularly difficult. Ski resorts, if I'm going to photograph an event at a ski resort and I'm not skiing, it's got a little bit extra warmth in it because of this heavy liner. It has a very comfortable loose fit. A lot of people use them for snowmobiling. But let's look at something completely different. This is a mountaineering boot. And it's like a brick. This thing is, I call these Herman Munster boots. That's what they look like, right? They look so big and heavy. But you'll notice, compared to this boot, they both have the rubber that goes pretty far up the side of the boot, and it goes completely all the way around. It's one piece, seamless. Are they both seamless? This one's got a seam in it. In this boot, I don't see a seam anywhere. I don't know how they did that, but this boot, unlike the other one, is exactly the opposite when it comes to the sole. This thing is so rigid it doesn't even bend. Oh, I can't twist it at all. It's basically built, you see this orange piece here is actually plastic. So it's extremely rigid, and the reason they do that is you can actually use these for ice climbing. You can put crampons on this boot. It has a little platform on it, is a word for it, I can't remember the word of it, but it's designed in the tip so that you can actually hook, you hook that on the toe, like that. And then in the back, you hook it in the back, push the lever, and it locks it into place. It's a highly specialized thing for like winter mountaineering. If you're going to be walking on ice, you can be walking on a glacier. This crampon is not an ice climbing crampon. Ice climbing crampons have big, larger, pointy things on the front. I guess they're called teeth, but and they tend to be replaceable. This one's not replaceable. This is called a trekking crampon. And you can get crampons to fit boots without the need for this. The eyelets here for the laces, these are the most durable bomb-proof eyelets I've ever seen in my life. The tongue on this boot is like almost one complete sealed piece. If you look in here, it's not a seam. This is actually the same piece of leather. It's just folded over. So it's extremely water resistant, extremely heavy, very specialized. You probably don't want them. They're difficult to walk in, honestly. So there you have it. That's 2 different examples of winter boots. We looked through a whole bunch of different 3-season boots. Get out, take a walk in the woods, have fun. I'll see you later. Bye. Hey man, today we're talking about hiking boots. You dig? Today we talk about the hiking boot.